Hey, what's up guys? Alex here with a new video, and today we're doing another comparison, this time between the Canon EOS R and the Canon EOS R5. Now I feel like I have to do this in every video, but I am a wedding and portrait photographer based out of Austin, Texas, so I will not be covering any of the video features or specs in this video. Just like in my last comparison, we'll be comparing images in Lightroom, we'll be comparing high ISO, and we will also be comparing dynamic range. So let's get the show started. For this comparison, we have all the files with lens corrections on and all the files using the Adobe Color Profile. Other than that, they have not been touched. I will be showing you a raw file and then I'll be showing you an edited file. And most importantly, I've matched the white balances. Now I've done this because in my previous comparison, you guys told me you wanted to see the color differences. So in these files, they are using the exact same white balance. They're using Kelvin. And then in the edited files, I've tried to match the white balances so they look identical or as close as possible. With that being said, let's get started. Here on the left, we have the R5, and here on the right, we have the EOS R. And like I said before, these are the exact same settings, exact same white balance, and you can see how the EOS R just leans more on the green tones and the R5 more on the magenta tones. And again, like with the EOS R and the R6, the R exposes a brighter image at the same setting. So here we're both at 1/125th, 1.2/100, and you can see that the R is just a brighter image. And if you go to edit it and correct it, the R is about 3/4 of a stop brighter. So something to note there. But overall, these files, they're both solid. They both look good. The R5 clearly has more resolution, but other than the more resolution and the color science, they both look pretty good. So let's go ahead and look at the exact same files with my preset on. Okay, so here we have the exact same files with my preset on. I've tried to match the white balance as close as possible, and you can see that they look fairly similar. So if I zoom in, 30 megapixels on the R is kind of like that sweet spot. Obviously having more with the R5, you're able to crop in more, you're able to get more resolution, but as far as detail goes, both images are great. The 51.2 is just a beautiful lens, and you can see tons and tons of detail on both files. And when exposed properly, these files look pretty much the same. Like I don't see too much of a difference. Now, of course, the white balance isn't exact. I feel like I got it pretty close. But overall, like when exposed properly and looking at any type of examples, like these files are gonna look identical. So let's go ahead and go to a different set of photos. On the left, we have the R5. On the right, we have the R. Again, everything the same, white balance matched, and you can see the same thing. The R5 leans more on the magenta tones. The R leans more on the green tones, but overall, both files look fairly similar. Zooming in, both files have tons of detail, and the R exposes brighter. So no surprises here. Let's take a look at this file edited with my preset. Here we have both files edited with my preset, white balance match as close as possible. And you can see there really is no difference. Again, just like the previous photo with the R5, you have more resolution, which means you can get in a little tighter. Both files are extremely clean. Colors look almost identical. Now, when trying to match the white balances, they're extremely different. So you have to compensate by obviously adding more magenta tones on the R file, but that's just a white balance thing, right? So if you're using both these cameras for a wedding, or if you want to keep your R as a backup to an R5 or even an R6, it's fairly easy to get the colors to match. Like you can see here in these examples, same preset. The only thing I've changed and tweaked to make them get closer is the white balance. Okay guys, another set of photos here. So we went outside the parking garage, and I am going to include all these photos to download so you can play with them yourself. All these photos are going to yield the same result, right? The R is going to just lean more towards the greens, and the R5 is going to be more towards the magentas. The R is going to expose 3/4 of a stop brighter. The R5 is going to have more resolution, so when you zoom in, you're able to get in tighter. But when exposed properly, these images both look great. Like it isn't that much of a difference. If we look at both of them with my preset on, they're both going to look very similar. So when you're upgrading for these cameras, just know that you're not going to see a massive change in image quality. With the R5, you're going to get more resolution. You're going to get obviously all the upgraded features in the body, but don't expect a night and day difference. Like these cameras at least from the last 5 years, when exposed properly, are all going to do a phenomenal job at delivering great results. And you can see here how the R is literally going toe to toe with the R5. I'm going to do another different scenario here before we go into some dynamic range and high ISO tests. Here I put the sun behind my wife, and again, similar things, right? The R exposes brighter. The R5 has more magenta tones. Both files look great in my opinion. And when we look at with my preset on, I think the recap here, when you look at all these photos, and again, feel free to download them so you can play with them. When exposed properly, do not expect a massive change in image quality. The R is a great camera. The R has a great sensor. So don't expect like you're gonna have a leaps and bounds better images just because you're upgrading to a more expensive camera. Now here we have a dynamic range test. So I underexposed this photo by 2 stops according to the light meter, and you're gonna see off the bat again, the R on the right exposes brighter, exposes greener. The R5 exposes more magenta, darker. And the goal here was to see if there's a big difference in dynamic range. Now the R, I comfortably underexposed to 2 stops. Again, I've used this camera for almost 2 years now, and that's as far as I'd push it, and you're gonna see why here in a second. The R5 is very similar to the R6, where I feel like you can underexpose it up to 3 stops and be okay. So let me go ahead and just get both of them exposed properly and see the differences. So here, all I've done is raise the exposure. You can see again, the color differences are there. And if you zoom into my wife's face, you can see that the R here on the right-hand side does a really good job at holding up. Again, this is 2 stops underexposed, and this is where I feel comfortable. And when you look at like my wife's face and her hair, there's still enough detail here where the R is a usable file being underexposed 2 stops. Now keep in mind, we're underexposing 2 stops at ISO 100, right? That's gonna make a difference. Obviously lower ISOs will give you cleaner results, but you're gonna notice here, and again, we're being nitpicky, right? We're comparing. On the R, you start getting some color noise here on the corner because the image is underexposed 2 stops. The R5 does not have a pronounced color noise yet. You can start seeing some magenta tones here in the color noise. You see it more on the R, which tells me that the R5 can be pushed a little bit more, and the R, obviously at 2 stops, I feel that's where its limit is at. The minute you start pushing it more, the shadows just fall apart and you start getting just more noise. Now let's look at both of these images with my preset on and see if there's a big difference. So here they both have my preset on. Here again, I've tried to match them as close as possible. If I zoom into the face, both files look great. There really isn't a loss of detail with the R, even though it's underexposed 2 stops. And in the exposed areas or the main areas here, there really is no difference. If we go back to the corners where we started seeing some noise, you can see it here on the R. There's tons of green color noise here in the corner, which means, again, in the shadows, the R at 2 stops is at its limit. The R5 is cleaner. So here's where you start seeing some of the differences. I should have done a test underexposing at 3 stops so you can get more of an idea. But here, to get them to match, I actually had to raise the R5 2 3/4 because naturally it's already underexposed 1 stop almost. From the get-go, right, as you see in previous photos. So here, you're actually looking at the R5 about 2 3/4 underexposed, and it's still yielding a cleaner result. So keep that in mind. When looking at dynamic range, the R5 is a newer sensor, and that's where you're gonna start seeing more differences when you underexpose and in high ISO examples, which we'll get to here next. Okay, so here we are with high ISOs. Now this one's gonna be interesting, right? Because a lot of people are gonna want to see a big difference and a huge upgrade. And you gotta keep in mind, with cameras, the higher the resolution, usually the noisier they are. Now, that means that if you're able to grab a 45 megapixel file from the R5 and shrink it down to a 30 megapixel file, you will have a cleaner result. But for this example, we're just gonna keep it native. We're gonna keep it at 45 megapixels and we're gonna keep it at 30 megapixels. And we're gonna look at ISO 1600, 3200, and 6400. Here we have the R5 on the left, the R on the right, both at 1600. Let's take a closer look here. They both look good. And as a matter of fact, in this photo, you can see how both cameras are reading color differently. So for this example, I have both in the white balance as shot. So this is how the camera read this scene. I did not change the white balance to match them. And you can see how cameras, they look similar, right? Now, obviously color differences. The R5 has more of a punchier color out of the camera. The R does look a little more desaturated. That's something you can fix in post. But as far as noise goes, they both look very comparable. This might not seem like a win for the R5, but it is a win for the R5 because again, you have 15 more megapixels here on the R5's file. So usually you expect to see more noise. And as a matter of fact, if you look here in the green, you actually are getting a hair less noise than you are on the R. I wouldn't say it's much, right? But it is a little cleaner. There is a little less of that digital noise going on. But at 1600, I think the EOS R was a great camera and totally usable. And both these files are completely usable in my opinion. Here we have both files at ISO 3200 and let's go ahead and zoom in here. we start seeing more noise on both cameras. And again, very similar thing. You can see more pronounced noise here in the greens in the R's file. The R5 is just a hair cleaner. It is not leaps and bounds cleaner, but don't forget that you have 15 more megapixels. So overall, it's pretty impressive that the R5 is still a hair cleaner than the R, considering its high resolution. But at 3200, the EOS R is a totally usable file in my opinion. I've used it for weddings at 3200. I've delivered beautiful files at 3200, and this is the limit though for the R. I never really liked pushing it to ISO 6400, and you'll see why here in a second. These files are very comparable, and I think it's a huge win for the R5 considering it has more megapixels. And here at ISO 6400, R5 on the left, R on the right, what's interesting is at 6400 on the R, you start losing some of that color fidelity. You can see as you go up the ISO range, the R starts losing that color fidelity, right? So it gets more desaturated. It's not as accurate. The R5 holds its colors through the entire range. So the 6400 file looks just as good as the 3200 file in my opinion, as far as color reproduction. Now this is something you can add in sliders and fix it in post-processing, right? But again, this is just straight out of camera. Zooming in to see the noise, here you're gonna see that kind of similar trend, right? Both have a good amount of noise. Let's not deny that. But the R5 it's a hair cleaner. Like, I would not say it's that much cleaner. It's definitely a slight bit as far as noise goes, but the colors look better on the R5 out of the camera in my opinion. You can see that my wife's lips still look a little pink, and you can see on the R just looking very desaturated, very zombie mode. That's part of using high ISO. You start losing some of that color accuracy. So I think here the R5, yes, it's only a hair cleaner in the noise, but it is better as far as reproducing the color from the scene. So overall, I think the R definitely holds its weight. I think the R's limit is ISO 3200. The R5, even though it's a hair cleaner, just because of that big range, I would feel comfortable shooting at 3200 as well. 6400 if you're in a pinch, but I think if you're really looking to shoot higher ISOs, the R6, which we'll do a comparison next, is definitely a clear winner for better noise performance. But overall, I think it's very interesting to see how these cameras do next to each other, and let's wrap up this video. All right, so what did you guys think? Before we start talking about it, I want to start off by saying the Canon EOS R is still a phenomenal camera in 2020 and will still be a phenomenal camera in 2021. The sensor in that camera is the same sensor as the 5D Mark IV, and at 30 megapixels, it's really a sweet spot, and that camera isn't going anywhere. Now, by saying the R5 is better than the Canon EOS R is by no means saying that the Canon EOS R is no longer relevant or it's a bad camera. So keep that in mind. When you factor in the entire package, when you factor in that the Canon EOS R5 has 15 more megapixels, has the same if not better high ISO performance, better dynamic range, better ergonomics, IBIS, dual memory card slots, better weather sealing, and better video features, which I have not talked about and will not talk about in this video, the clear winner here is the Canon EOS R5. For me, this is my main camera moving forward. I will be using a Canon EOS R5 and an R6 for all my wedding work, and I love that combo. I love having a high resolution camera, and I also like having a in-the-middle camera with the Canon EOS R6. I'll be doing another video comparing those two and how they pair with each other very well. But for this video, it's safe to say that the Canon EOS R5 is a better camera. Like I did in my previous comparison, it's very important to remember this. If you're properly exposing an image with any camera in the last 5 years, the results will be very, very similar. These new cameras, these new sensors, they're better with dynamic range, they're better with high ISO. So if you're always exposing properly, if you're not in challenging situations, if you're in a studio environment, sometimes the upgrade isn't worth it. But if you're a wedding photographer like myself, and you're always being thrown out there in different environments, different lighting situations, and you never really know what's coming your way, having that flexibility and knowing you have extra dynamic range, having that flexibility knowing you have good ISO performance, really unlocks several doors throughout your day and doesn't limit you. Cameras are tools, and these tools shouldn't get in the way of you getting the job done. And as cameras get better and they give you more options, it makes your job easier. So for me, in this case, the Canon EOS R5 overall is the winner. But for image quality, it was a lot closer than I expected. I want to know your thoughts, guys, so leave them down below in the comments. As always, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one, guys. Peace.